I stood by the dean's mahogany desk. My mother's voice on the speakerphone was high and shrill, a stark contrast to my steady breathing. "He's mentally unstable, Marcus," she hissed, unaware the chief compliance officer was recording. "He didn't win that $42,000 grant. I did. It belongs in the family trust, not his account. He's just a child playing at being a man." I didn't interrupt. I just looked at the forensic IP report in my hand. My mother told my university advisor I was emotionally unstable to gain control of my academic records. She thought she was protecting me. What she didn't know was that I had already spent 3 years studying clinical psychology, and I knew exactly how a narcissist operates. When a $42,000 merit grant went missing from my student portal, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I called the university's chief compliance officer and requested a forensic digital audit. What we found in the metadata would change our family dynamic forever. If your own mother tried to steal your future in the name of love, would you hand her the handcuffs, or would you keep the secret to save your family's reputation? Let me know in the comments. Stories like this happen behind closed doors every day. If you believe in standing up for the truth, please subscribe to Drama Stories. Your support helps us bring these clinical accounts of justice to light. Now let's look at the evidence. The air in the academic affairs office always smelled of over-circulated oxygen and burnt coffee. It was a sterile, quiet place, the kind of place where important decisions were made behind closed doors. I checked my watch. 2:00 p.m. exactly. I didn't rush. I didn't even feel particularly anxious. In my 3rd year as a psychology major, I had learned that anxiety was just a physiological response to a perceived threat. And I hadn't perceived a threat yet. When I opened the door to the inner office, I didn't see my usual advisor, Sarah. Instead, sitting behind the heavy mahogany desk was a man I recognized from the university's legal directory. Marcus Thorne. He was the chief compliance officer, a man with silver hair cut to a military precision and eyes that looked like they had seen every financial crime imaginable. "Sit down, Leo," he said. His voice was flat, devoid of the forced cheerfulness usually found on a college campus. I sat. I placed my hands flat on my knees. I noticed a slight smudge on the corner of his desk, but I kept my focus on his face. "I was told there was confusion regarding my course plan," I said. My voice was steady. It was the voice I used during clinical observations. Marcus Thorne didn't reach for a course catalog. Instead, he turned a computer monitor toward me. "Your mother, Elena, called the department office 4 times yesterday. She also left a 6-minute voicemail." He pressed play. The office was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the mini-fridge in the corner. Then, my mother's voice filled the room. It wasn't the voice she used at dinner. It was her emergency voice, high-pitched, breathless, and carefully curated to sound like a woman on the verge of a breakdown. "My son is lost," she whispered into the recording. "He's been showing signs of severe emotional instability. He's erratic. He's talking about changing his major to something completely useless, and I'm terrified he's having a manic episode. As the person who manages his finances and his future, I need full access to his records immediately. We need to get him back on track before he ruins his life." I listened to the entire 6 minutes. I didn't flinch. I didn't interrupt. I watched a small bird land on the windowsill outside and then fly away. "She also submitted this," Marcus said, sliding a printed document across the desk. It was a FERPA waiver, the Federal Educational Rights and Privacy Act form that allows a student to grant parental access to their records. My signature was at the bottom. It looked exactly like mine, the same sharp L, the same slight tilt to the right. But I hadn't signed a document in months. "The waiver was uploaded digitally through your student portal," Marcus continued, leaning back, "along with a request to change the disbursement destination for your university merit grant. Do you know the exact amount of that grant, Leo?" $42,150.50, I replied instantly. "Exactly," Marcus said. "The request was to move those funds into an external family management trust. It was flagged because the routing number didn't match your previous 3 years of tuition payments." I looked at the forged signature on the paper. I felt a cold, sharp clarity wash over me. This wasn't just meddling. This wasn't advocating. This was a calculated attempt to seize $42,000 under the guise of a mental health crisis. "I didn't sign that," I said. I looked Marcus Thorne directly in the eye. "And I am not having a manic episode, but I would like to request a forensic audit of the IP address used to upload that form." Marcus Thorne didn't smile, but his eyes softened by a fraction of a millimeter. "I've already initiated the audit, Leo. We'll have the metadata by tomorrow morning." I stood up. My hands were perfectly still. My mother thought she was the lead architect of my life. She didn't realize that I had been taking notes on her behavior for 21 years, and the data was finally ready for analysis. I walked back to my dorm room with the steady, rhythmic pace of a man who was counting his steps. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. The university campus was loud, full of students laughing, the screech of skateboards on pavement, and the distant thud of a bass drum from the music building. To them, it was a Tuesday. To me, it was the day I began documenting a felony. My room was small, organized with clinical precision. My textbooks were lined up by height. My desk was clear of everything except my laptop and a single black pen. I sat down and felt the cool plastic of the chair against my back. I didn't open my laptop immediately. I sat in the silence for exactly 2 minutes, listening to the radiator hiss and the faint sound of my neighbor's muffled television. The silence was heavy, but I didn't find it oppressive. I found it useful. When I finally logged into my student portal, the light from the screen reflected in my glasses. I navigated to the Financial Aid tab. There it was, a bright green banner at the top of the page. Merit grant awarded 42,150s. In a normal world, that number would represent a future. It was 3 semesters of tuition, housing, and the freedom to focus entirely on my clinical research. But when I clicked on the disbursement details link, the numbers underneath changed everything. The direct deposit information had been modified. My personal checking account, the one I had used since freshman year, had been replaced. In its place was a routing number for a bank in a different state and an account labeled the Alina Fee Family Management Trust. I stared at the screen. I didn't blink. I didn't feel my heart race. Instead, I felt a strange, cold curiosity. My mother had managed to navigate a multi-factor authentication system, forge a digital signature, and redirect a federal-level grant into a trust I didn't even know existed. She had done all of this while telling my advisor I was unstable. The irony was palpable. In the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, projection is a defense mechanism where an individual attributes their own unacceptable impulses to another. My mother was calling me erratic while she was systematically committing identity fraud. Then, my phone vibrated on the desk. The caller ID displayed a photo of her, smiling, holding a glass of white wine at a garden party. Elena. I picked up on the 3rd ring. I didn't say hello. I waited. "Leo, honey, are you there?" Her voice was soft, melodic, and draped in a thick layer of artificial concern. "I've been calling you all afternoon. I was so worried after I spoke to the university. You sounded so distant lately." "I'm here, Elena," I said. I used her first name intentionally. It was a clinical boundary. There was a brief pause, the kind of silence that happens when a predator realizes the prey isn't running. "Elena? Oh, we're being formal today? I suppose that's the instability your advisor mentioned. Honey, I only called them because I care. I saw your grades, that B on your neuropsychology paper, and I knew something was wrong. You're spiraling, Leo. You're not yourself." "I'm looking at my student portal right now," I said, my voice as flat as a dial tone. "I'm looking at the routing number for the Family Management Trust. 42,150 is scheduled to be deposited there on Friday." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. For 5 seconds, I could only hear the faint, rhythmic sound of her breathing. When she spoke again, the concerned mother persona had vanished. It was replaced by something sharper, something desperate. "That money is for your protection, Leo," she snapped. "You're 21, but you're clearly not capable of handling that kind of responsibility. If you have a breakdown, which you are clearly having right now, that money needs to be in a safe place. I am the trustee. I am the one who ensures you don't throw your life away on whatever it is you do in that dorm room." "You forged my signature on a FERPA waiver," I said. I picked up my black pen and began tapping it against the desk. Tap, tap, tap. "That is a violation of federal law. You accessed my portal without authorization. That is a cybercrime." "Don't you dare use that tone with me," she shouted. I could hear her pacing on the other end, the sharp clack of her heels on her hardwood floors. "I am your mother. I am the only person who actually cares about your future. Everyone else, your advisor, your little friends, they're just watching you fail. I'm the one saving you. You should be thanking me, you ungrateful child. If you keep pushing me, Leo, don't come crying when the university realizes you're a liability and kicks you out." "I won't be crying, Elena," I said. "I'll be waiting for the IP audit results." "The what?" Her voice dropped an octave. The bravado flickered. "The forensic metadata," I explained clinically. "The university is tracking the exact device and location used to upload that forged document. If it traces back to your home in the suburbs, the conversation will no longer be between you and me. It will be between you and the university compliance office." I didn't wait for her to respond. I didn't want to hear the sobbing that I knew was coming, the performative tears she used to end every argument she couldn't win. I ended the call. The silence returned to my room, but it felt different now. It felt like a countdown. I looked back at the screen. 42,150 50s. It was a specific number, a precise amount of betrayal. I opened a new folder on my desktop and labeled it. Evidence Elena Phase 1. I wasn't just a student anymore. I was a witness. The silence following the phone call lasted exactly 4 minutes and 12 seconds. I sat motionless, watching the digital clock on my taskbar. At 4:17 p.m., the first vibration occurred, then the second, then a rhythmic, persistent buzzing that moved my phone 3 inches across the mahogany surface of my desk. I didn't pick it up. I didn't even turn the screen over. I knew the sequence by heart. It was the standard escalation of a personality rooted in high control. First comes the righteous indignation, followed by the martyrdom, and finally, the scorched earth phase. I opened a blank spreadsheet. I labeled the first column, communication log. Every buzz was a data point. By 6:09 p.m., the tally was impressive. 14 missed calls, 22 text messages, 3 emails. I scrolled through them with the detached curiosity of a researcher observing a lab rat in a maze of its own making. Text message number 4 read, "Leo, I am shaking. How can you speak to me that way after everything I've sacrificed? I am literally having a heart palpitation." Text message number 12. "I've spoken to your Aunt Sarah. We are all very concerned about this audit talk. It's clear you're having a paranoid episode. Please, honey, let me help you before you do something you can't take back." Text message number 21. "If you don't call me in the next 10 minutes, I am calling campus security for a wellness check. I will tell them you are a danger to yourself." I adjusted my glasses. The threat of a wellness check was a classic move, a way to use institutional power to humiliate a target into submission. I didn't panic. I simply opened my browser and sent a pre-drafted email to the resident assistant and the campus police non-emergency line. I attached the recording of our previous phone call and the transcript of the text messages. I CC'd Marcus Thorne. Subject, proactive clarification regarding family dispute, I wrote. Please be advised that my mother Elena may attempt to initiate a bad faith wellness check. I am currently in my room, studying. I am not in distress. Attached is evidence of her stated intent to use emergency services as a tool of harassment. I hit send. The satisfaction wasn't emotional. It was the quiet click of a trap door being locked from the inside. By 9 p.m., the info diet was in full effect. I had blocked her number temporarily to ensure a full night's sleep. I needed my cognitive functions at 100% for the meeting with IT the following morning. As I prepared for bed, I noticed a final email from my father. My father was a man of few words, mostly because my mother had spent 30 years speaking over him. "Leo," the email began, "your mother is hysterical. She says you're trying to sue her over your tuition money. She's already talking to a lawyer about conservatorship options to protect your assets. I don't know what's going on, but you know how she gets. Just apologize so we can have a quiet weekend. I don't want this blowing up at the Dean's Gala on Friday." I stared at the word, conservatorship. It was a heavy, clinical term, a legal death sentence for independence. She wasn't just trying to steal the 150 anymore. She was looking for a way to permanently own the person who owned the money. She wanted a legal leash. And then I saw the mention of the gala, the Dean's Circle Black-Tie Gala. It was the university's most prestigious event of the year. Elena had spent months bragging about being the parent representative for the junior class. She had already bought a silk gown. She had already practiced her speech about nurturing the next generation of healers. She wanted a quiet weekend. She wanted to stand on that stage and be the face of maternal perfection while she worked behind the scenes to dismantle my legal rights. I closed my laptop. I didn't feel angry. I felt a strange, cold sense of mission. My mother had provided the setting, the audience, and the motive. All she was missing was the evidence, and Marcus Thorne was currently extracting that from the university's servers. I lay down and closed my eyes. I counted my breaths until my heart rate settled into a perfect, steady 60 beats per minute. The golden child was gone. In his place was a witness who knew exactly where the bodies were buried and who had the receipts to prove it. Friday was 4 days away. The clock was ticking. The IT basement was 15 degrees cooler than the rest of the campus. It smelled like ozone and recycled air. Marcus Thorne sat in front of a triple monitor setup, the blue light reflecting off his silver hair and the lenses of his thin-rimmed glasses. The only sound was the low, constant thrum of server fans, a white noise that I found deeply satisfying. It was the sound of cold, hard logic. "Data doesn't lie, Leo," Marcus said. He didn't look at me. He pointed a steady finger at the middle screen. "We traced the login session that initiated the FERPA waiver and the bank routing change. Tuesday, 2:14 a.m. I leaned in. The spreadsheet on the screen was a wall of clinical precision. Login IP, 72/14-213D98, MAC address, 001A2B3C4D5E. Geographic location, Oakwood Heights. It was my mother's home address. I stared at the timestamp, 2:14 a.m. While I was sleeping in my dorm room 3 hours away, my mother was sitting at her desk, likely sipping herbal tea, systematically forging my digital identity. She wasn't advocating for my mental health. She was using her knowledge of my personal security questions, my first pet's name, my favorite elementary school teacher, to bypass the university's two-factor authentication. "The metadata shows she spent exactly 24 minutes on the portal," Marcus continued. His voice was as dry as parchment. "She didn't just change the bank info for the $42,150.50. She also accessed the Student Health Center archives. She downloaded your private psychiatric evaluation from last semester." I felt a slight chill, but my hands remained flat on the laminate table. My mother now had a PDF of my private clinical assessments. She had the weapon she needed for her conservatorship play. She had the money in her sights, and she had the proof of my instability in her inbox. She was building a cage out of my own medical history. "Will this hold up in a formal inquiry?" I asked. My voice was a flat line, devoid of the betrayal I felt. Marcus finally turned to look at me. He gave a sharp, clinical nod. "This is more than an inquiry, Leo. This is evidence of wire fraud and identity theft. The University Legal Counsel is already reviewing the file, but there's a complication." He paused. I waited. I didn't prompt him. I let the silence stretch until the hum of the servers felt like a physical weight in the room. "The Dean's Gala," Marcus said. "Your mother has already submitted her speech for the parent representative slot. In it, she mentions your struggles and her financial stewardship of your recovery. If we move now, It's a quiet legal matter. It ends in a private office. And if we wait until Friday? I asked. Then it happens in front of 400 donors, the board of trustees, and the dean, Marcus replied. I reached out and took the slim, black USB drive Marcus was holding. It was light, almost weightless, but it contained the digital fingerprint of a woman who thought she was untouchable. I didn't need to scream at her. I didn't even need to answer her 47 missed calls. I'll wait for the gala, I said. I stood up and smoothed the front of my shirt. The clinical diagnosis was complete. Now it was time for the public execution of the narrative she had spent my entire life writing. The silence in my dorm room was absolute. I had placed my phone face down on the desk at 8 a.m. By noon, it had vibrated 47 times. I didn't need to look at the screen to know the narrative arc of my mother's panic. It was a predictable sequence of psychological maneuvers. First, the appeal to my guilt, then the appeal to my fear, and finally, the appeal to my public image. I opened my laptop and continued my research. I was treating my own life like a clinical case study. I documented every incoming message into a time-stamped log. 10:14 a.m. Leo, I've spoken to a family law attorney. If you don't return the university's call and retract this audit, I will have no choice but to file for an emergency conservatorship. You are clearly not in your right mind. 11:32 a.m. The gala is in 48 hours. Everyone expects us to be there as a family. Do you want to humiliate us? Is that what you want? To destroy my reputation over a simple misunderstanding about a grant? I didn't feel the urge to correct her. I didn't feel the need to explain that redirecting $42,150 into a secret trust wasn't a misunderstanding. To a narcissist, truth is a fluid concept, shaped by whatever keeps them in control. To me, truth was binary. It was the IP address 72.14.213.98. It was the timestamp 2:14 a.m. I spent the afternoon polishing my shoes. The leather was black, glossy, and cold to the touch. I hung my suit on the back of the door. It was a sharp, charcoal gray, the uniform of a professional, not a struggling child. Marcus Thorne sent a brief email at 4 p.m. The dean has been briefed. The parent representative slot is still hers. The stage is set. I replied with a single word, confirmed. I wasn't hiding from my mother. I was starving her. A narcissist needs a reaction to survive, an argument, a tear, or a scream. By giving her nothing, I was forcing her to escalate. I wanted her to arrive at that gala feeling desperate. I wanted her to be so convinced of her own lies that she would say them into a microphone in front of 400 people. The info diet wasn't just a boundary, it was the final preparation. I went to bed early. My heart rate was 62 beats per minute, steady, silent, ready. The formal invitation arrived via courier at 9 a.m. on Thursday. It was printed on heavy, cream-colored cardstock with gold-embossed edges. The Dean's Circle Gala, honoring academic excellence and parental support. On the back, my mother had written a note in her signature elegant, loopy cursive. It was a masterpiece of cognitive dissonance. Leo, I've picked up your charcoal suit from the tailor. Let's put this little disagreement behind us for the sake of the family. I'll be giving my speech at 8:30 p.m. I expect you to be in the front row. Don't make a scene, honey. Think of your future. I ran my thumb over the embossed gold. She still referred to the theft of $42,150 as a disagreement. To her, the truth was a PR problem to be managed, not a crime to be answered for. She assumed my silence over the last 48 hours was a sign of surrender. She thought she had successfully gaslit me into believing my own instability made me a liability. She was wrong. My silence wasn't a retreat. It was an observation period. I spent the afternoon at the university print shop. I didn't print a speech. I didn't print a retraction. I printed 400 copies of a single one-page document, the digital forensic login report provided by Marcus Thorne. It clearly highlighted the IP address 72.14.388 and the timestamp 2:14 a.m. At the bottom of each page, I added a clinical footnote. Authorized user was asleep at 312 North Hall. Unauthorized access originated from the residence of Elena Fave. Before I left the shop, I checked my bank account one last time. The transfer to the Family Management Trust was still pending for Friday morning. Elena was counting on the gala to solidify her image as my protector before the money hit her account. She needed the audience to see a struggling son and a heroic mother. I folded the first copy and placed it in the inner pocket of my charcoal suit. The paper was crisp. The evidence was dry. Before we continue to the final confrontation, if you find this clinical pursuit of justice as satisfying as I do, please subscribe to Drama Stories. Your support ensures that these narratives of accountability are never silenced. I checked my watch. 5 p.m. The gala was 24 hours away. I felt a strange, cold sense of peace. In psychology, there is a term called catharsis, the process of releasing and thereby providing relief from strong or repressed emotions. My mother was expecting a family photo. I was bringing a forensic audit. The grand ballroom of the University Union was a sea of black silk and polished silver. 400 guests, donors, trustees, and faculty, conversed in low, cultured tones. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and aged scotch. I stood at the back of the room, my hands resting at my sides. My charcoal suit fit perfectly. I felt weightless, like a surgeon preparing for the first incision. Next to me stood Marcus Thorne. His silver hair caught the light of the crystal chandeliers. He held a slim black leather folder. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence was a silent validation of the facts. On stage, my mother, Elena, was at the podium. She looked radiant in her sapphire gown, a string of pearls catching the light. She adjusted the microphone, a practiced, humble smile on her face. As the parent representative for the junior class, she began, her voice echoing through the hall, I've learned that being a parent isn't just about celebrating the wins. It's about the silent vigils. It's about protecting our children when they are too fragile to protect themselves. The room went so quiet I could hear the faint, rhythmic clinking of a server placing dessert forks onto porcelain. My own son, Leo, she continued, looking directly at me with a gaze full of artificial pity, is currently facing a profound mental health crisis. It has been a difficult year of instability, but as his mother, I've taken the necessary steps to secure his future. I've established a family management trust to oversee his $42,150.50 merit grant. Because sometimes love means holding the reins when your child is spiraling out of control. A murmur of sympathy rippled through the crowd. I saw several parents nod in approval. Elena's face was the definition of peak arrogance. She thought she had won. She thought she had used the public stage to cement her conservatorship narrative. I began to walk toward the stage. My steps were measured. My heart rate was 61 beats per minute. I reached the podium just as Elena was about to step down. The dean looked confused. The crowd leaned in. I didn't take the microphone by force. I waited for her to yield it. When she saw the look in my eyes, cold, intelligent, and entirely devoid of the instability she had described, her smile faltered. Thank you, Elena, I said. My voice was amplified, flat, and clinical. It's true that someone accessed my student portal at 2:14 a.m. on Tuesday to forge a FERPA waiver and redirect that grant. It's also true that a psychiatric evaluation was illegally downloaded. I opened the black folder Marcus had handed me. I pulled out the forensic login report. However, I continued, turning to the dean and the board of trustees, the university IT department has confirmed the IP address used for these actions. It is 72.14.213.98. The exact location is my mother's home office in Oakwood Heights. I am not spiraling, Dean. I am presenting evidence of identity theft and the attempted embezzlement of $42,150. The silence that followed was visceral. It was a vacuum. I watched the blood drain from Elena's face until she was ghost white. She reached for the podium to steady herself. Her safety net had just become a noose of her own making. I handed the report to the dean. I believe the University Compliance Office has the rest of the metadata. I'm ready to proceed with the formal investigation. I stepped down from the stage. I didn't look back at the woman who had tried to steal my future. I looked at Marcus Thorne, who gave a single sharp nod. The diagnosis was complete. The surgery was a success. The silence in the grand ballroom was no longer empty. It was heavy, a physical weight pressing down on the 400 guests. I could hear the rhythmic hum of the industrial air conditioning and the distant, sharp clatter of a silver spoon hitting the marble floor near table 12. No one moved. No one whispered. They simply stared at the woman on the stage who was currently vibrating with a frequency I had never seen before. Elena's face was no longer radiant. The sapphire of her gown seemed to drain the last bit of color from her skin, leaving her a translucent, sickly white. She gripped the edges of the mahogany podium so hard her knuckles turned the color of bone. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. No sound came out. She was experiencing what we call a narcissistic collapse, the total disintegration of a false self-image when confronted with undeniable objective truth. "Leo," she finally managed to croak. It wasn't the voice of a mother. It was the sound of a trapped animal. You're confused. This is just a misunderstanding of the metadata. I was protecting you. Protecting $42,150.50, I corrected. My voice remained a flat, unwavering line. By using a device with MAC address 00, 1 Alpha, 2 Bravo at 2:14 a.m. on Tuesday. Protectiveness usually involves consent, Elena. Fraud involves a keylogger and a forged signature. Marcus Thorne stepped forward, his black leather folder tucked neatly under his arm. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked at the dean. The university has already frozen the disbursement to the Family Management Trust. We have also contacted the Office of the General Counsel regarding the unauthorized access to student medical records. This is no longer a family matter. It is a compliance violation. The dean, a man who prided himself on the university's reputation above all else, looked at the forensic report I had handed him. His expression shifted from confusion to a cold, professional disdain. He looked at Elena, then signaled to the campus security officers standing near the service entrance. He didn't need to say a word. The invitation to leave was silent and absolute. I watched as 2 security guards approached the stage. They didn't touch her. They simply stood there, an immovable physical boundary. Elena looked around the room, searching for a friendly face, a sympathetic nod, or a drop of the pity she had cultivated for 21 years. She found nothing but 400 pairs of eyes reflecting her own reality back at her, a woman caught in the act of stealing her son's identity. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She simply turned and walked off the stage, her heels clicking against the hardwood with a hollow, frantic sound that echoed all the way to the exit. I didn't follow her. I didn't feel a rush of adrenaline or a surge of triumph. I felt a profound sense of equilibrium. The data had been corrected. The variables were back in their proper place. I turned back to my table, picked up my glass of water, and took a slow, deliberate sip. The water was cold. My pulse was 59 beats per minute. The golden child was officially dead. The witness was finally free. The morning after the gala, the campus was eerily still. At 8:15 a.m., I sat in the University Financial Aid office. The only sound was the rhythmic, mechanical whir of a laser printer. I watched the status bar on the monitor. Transaction status, reverted. The $42,150.50 had been pulled back from the Family Management Trust. It was now sitting in a newly encrypted student account, protected by a hardware security key that resided in my pocket. Marcus Thorne sat across from me, sipping a cup of black coffee. He looked as clinical as he had the day before. "The university has filed a formal report of unauthorized access," Marcus said. His voice was a low, steady hum. "Your mother's home IP address is blacklisted from all campus servers. If she attempts to log in again, it triggers an automatic alert to the local authorities." I nodded. I felt a sense of structural integrity returning to my life. I pulled out my phone and saw a final email from my father. It was sent at 3 a.m. Leo, your mother is in a state of total collapse. She's threatening to sell the house to pay for a defense attorney because the university is persecuting her. She says you've destroyed the family. Just tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you gave her the password. We can fix this if you just lie for her one last time. I didn't reply. I didn't even feel the familiar weight of guilt. In psychology, enmeshment occurs when personal boundaries are diffused. My father was asking me to dissolve my boundaries to protect a criminal act. I simply moved the email into the folder labeled Evidence Alina Phase 2. I then took a more definitive step. I sat down with a university legal advocate and signed a no-contact directive. It was a 3-page document, crisp and white. It legally prohibited Elena from contacting me, my professors, or any university department. Is this what you want, Leo? The advocate asked. It's not about what I want, I replied. I watched the ink of my signature dry on the page. It's about the data. The data shows that Elena is a risk to my academic and financial stability. This is the only logical mitigation strategy. I walked out into the sunlight. For the first time in 21 years, my future wasn't a group project. It was a solo operation. I had the money, I had the evidence, and I had the silence I had always craved. The investigation was moving to the next level. Elena's protection was about to meet the cold reality of a courtroom. The silence in my new apartment was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of my mother's house, nor the sterile, hum-filled silence of the university IT basement. It was the sound of a clean slate. I sat at my new desk, birchwood, minimalist, and watched the dust motes dance in a single beam of late afternoon sunlight. On the screen of my laptop, the final transaction was complete. 42's $150 had been successfully applied to my senior year tuition and housing. There was no family management trust involved. There were no middlemen. The routing number led directly to me. The legal fallout for Elena had been as clinical as my diagnosis of her. Faced with the metadata and the testimony of Marcus Thorne, she had opted for a private settlement to avoid a public criminal trial for wire fraud and identity theft. The cost of her protection was high. She was permanently barred from the university campus and required to pay back the legal fees incurred by the compliance office. My father's emails had stopped. The family quiet he so desperately wanted had finally arrived, though it was the quiet of a scorched earth. I pulled a single sheet of paper from a folder. It was my mother's final attempt at contact, a letter sent through her attorney. I didn't read it for the emotion. I read it for the syntax. I only wanted what was best for you, she wrote. You've traded a mother's love for a spreadsheet. I placed the letter in the shredder. The machine made a satisfying rhythmic whir crunch as it turned her last manipulation into thin strips of white confetti. She still didn't understand. A spreadsheet is objective. A spreadsheet doesn't forge signatures. A spreadsheet doesn't gaslight you into believing you are unstable to steal your inheritance. In clinical psychology, we talk about the individualization separation phase. It usually happens in childhood. For me, it happened at a Black-Tie Gala in front of 400 people. I had performed a radical surgery on my own life, and while the recovery involved a certain degree of isolation, the vitals were strong. I checked my pulse one last time, 60 beats per minute, a perfect, steady rhythm. I opened my textbook to Chapter 12, The Architecture of Personality. I picked up my black pen and began to take notes. My hands were perfectly steady. I wasn't a crisis case. I wasn't a golden child. I was a 21-year-old man with a secured future and a clear mind. The final audit was closed. The variables were solved. And for the first time in my life, I was the only person who held the password to my own soul.